this introduction to Photoshop, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the use of brushes and the idea of selecting different colours to make a digital painting. So I'm going to create a new document first of all, and to make life easy I'm going to just choose the international paper size of A4. There's a number of different defaults that we've got on Photoshop, and if you're opening Photoshop, sometimes the kind of standard size that opens will depend on the last selection that you've made, so it's always a good idea to give yourself enough kind of room to work with. So international paper size you should be familiar with. It's important to remember that an A4 piece of paper like this will take up as much memory as a full coloured picture. Essentially this image is made up of pixels, so it doesn't matter whether those pixels are red, green or blue, they're going to take up the same amount of information. So really Photoshop documents refer to the size of the document and also the size of the pixels within it, in other words the DPI, the dots per inch. So looking along this array of tools over here, what we're going to look for is the brush tool, and it's just located here. Sometimes the toolbox running down the side is displayed in this way, and it's important that you select the brush tool and not, for instance, the brush history tool. So when we take the brush tool, whenever we select any tool in Photoshop, up here is called the attributes menu, and the attributes menu display the various different attributes of this particular tool. Change the tool and the attributes change. So over here we've got typographic tools. Over here we've got different magnification tools. Actually this is not magnification, that's magnification. This is dodging and burning, where we can make image areas lighter or darker, and this one over here is the paint bucket tool, but for the moment we'll concentrate on the brush tool. So if I'm over here and I start to draw, you can see that the brush is making a mark. Now the size of the brush is dictated by this. So if I slide that along here and now start to make my drawing, you can see that the brush size is subsequently bigger. The flow of the brush is dictated here. The opacity of the brush is dictated here. So the larger your document, the larger the brush, often the slower the response rate. Also different kinds of brushes respond in different kinds of ways. So if I select this brush, again I can change the size of that brush, and you can see that it's a much more responsive brush than the previous one. The other brush was having to kind of apply different effects. At the moment everything's been worked in relationship to this particular colour. So if I double click on this colour, then I can choose any hue from anywhere really. So I can choose a fully saturated hue, which would be up the top here. I can choose a tint of that, a shade of that, a tone of that, and pretty much any variation of that particular hue. Whenever I click on here, what I'm getting is my new colour in relationship to the colour that I've just previously selected, so that can help when you're kind of making colour judgments about what you're trying to achieve. If I change the opacity and I change the size of that brush, then clearly there'll be a point where I've got an enormous brush and I'll obliterate everything as I go along. Whenever we're working in Photoshop, it's always worth remembering that we remember so many stages of what we've done through the history palette. At the moment you can see the history palette is available. So if I've gone too far with an image, I can undo the previous action that I've just caused. Once I've created my image, so I'm going to give this a bit more kind of structure now. So let me just play around with changing the colours a little bit, changing the brush size, also changing here the angle of attack. Let's choose a slightly different variation of that colour now. So here I've made a kind of little digital Howard Hodgkin painting. Let's just manipulate the colour further and change the brush size, or indeed the kind of brush. I might now just make that brush smaller and change the opacity of that brush. And again, as we've said before, the different kinds of brush that you choose might behave in different ways. So once we've created our design, it might be quite nice to crop this. I'm just going to go to the crop tool over here, and you can see when I click on that tool, again the attributes appear, and we get little handlebars which just tell me where I want the edges of that image to be. So if I move that up there and then double click, I've now applied my crop. So that's basically the brush tool over here. The attributes menu, we click on there and we can change different brush sizes. We can also select different kinds of brushes. Again, we can see here where this gives us much more information about this particular brush, and we can manipulate further. And also, one of the things to understand as well about the brush tool is that when you're working with the brush tool and these brushes appear, so if I come back over here, the amount of brushes that are available to you is really depending on what kind of brush has been selected. And if we come down here, there are all sorts of other brushes that can be chosen. So there's many brushes to work with in Photoshop. So once we've selected a brush, we can change the opacity of the brush, the flow of the brush, and the hue of the brush.